Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we'll talk about India's foreign policy's strategic autonomy. I, for one, really don't understand in the context of our foreign policy today as to what that means. But we'll try and investigate that issue. But let me, before we start doing that, set up my thoughts as to how this strategic autonomy is just a phrase which really has very little meaning. Look at our ties. Look at what's happening in West Asia. We see Israel today cross the yellow line in Palestine. They couldn't have taken more than 53% of that territory. Now Netanyahu says, I'm going to take over 70%. That's while the ceasefire is there. Israel has gone into South Lebanon, big time, and it wants to take over South Lebanon. About 1 million people have been displaced. And if you remember, when Israel wanted Iraq to be attacked, the US attacked Iraq. When Israel wanted Libya to be attacked, the US attacked Libya. When Israel wanted Syria to be attacked, the US attacked Syria. Wanted Iran to be attacked, the US attacked Iran. Iran was not an aggressor. Iran was not attacking anybody. So what it means is that there is a very strong nexus between Israel and the United States of America. And we have become, according to me, part of that nexus. Nobody perceives us as somebody independent of that nexus. So the problem is that when you align yourself and you depend on defense technology and armaments, Pegasus, surveillance technologies and other forms of technologies, now drones, obviously are dependent on Israel for a lot of things. So naturally, we can't part ways. So there we are as far as the world is concerned, the people of India are concerned, people around the world are concerned, they know that we are actually part of that nexus. Okay, now let's look at China. Our relations in China are pretty tenuous, if you ask me. Some efforts have been made to resolve some issues, but those issues have not been resolved. Chinese still occupy a large part of our territory. We have a 112 billion deficit as far as our trade is concerned. The Chinese have recently arrested a lady who came from Arunachal, went to Shanghai, arrested her. They don't recognize Arunachal. They say that's part of South Tibet. So we have a lot of problems with China. Those special representative meetings have started, but really nothing much has come out of it. Nothing much will, I think. If you look at Russia, we only buy oil from Russia now because if the US allows us to buy oil, we'll buy oil. If the US says, no, I'll impose tariffs, we won't buy oil. And our deficit with Russia is also about $59 billion. That's the situation with Russia. Russia is aligned to China, so look at our neighbors now. China is sort of slowly expanding influence with our neighbors. We have some influence and we should build on it, but I don't think we can win that battle. As far as the European Union is concerned, we have a free trade agreement with them, but I don't think that's come into force till 27, 28. And the fact is that even in the United States, even in Europe, even a country like France, a country like Italy, a country like Spain has condemned the United States and Israel for what's happening in the Middle East. And so that's where we are as a nation. And that's where our foreign policy is. So we can't, as far as Quad is concerned, we had a foreign ministers meeting in Quad recently. There were some, possibilities, but the leaders' meeting has been postponed, so I don't know when that's going to happen. And I think that next meeting of Quad would be under the chairmanship of Australia. That's what I'm given to understand. So there it is. Quad is also, at the moment, quite irrelevant. And with President Trump's visit to China and his statement that, look, Taiwan is so far away, gives a sense of that he might just not defend Taiwan. And his decision to give aid to Taiwan in terms of defense equipment, that also he has not confirmed. So there we are. That's the global situation. We've lost the leadership of the South as well. And BRICS, of course, is a divided setup. That's where we think we are as a nation. In that context, what do you mean by India's strategic autonomy? I have three extraordinary people who are going to help me decipher the concept that I may be dead wrong as to what this means. Shyam Saran, thank you very much. You're one of the best people to make us understand what it means. Former Foreign Secretary, Chairman of the NSAB, 1970 Foreign Service, Beijing, Tokyo, Ambassador to Myanmar, Indonesia, Nepal High Commissioner to Mauritius, Joint Secretary in the PMO, 91 to 92, Foreign Secretary 2004 to 2006, Special Envoy in the US nuclear deal, Special Negotiator on climate change. You wear so many hats, Sherpa at the G8 and G5, Padma Bhushan. Thank you very much for being here. Also, you're an author. And then Jaimini, thank you very much. Most of your from physics to diplomacy, pretty long jump. PhD from Tufts, masters from MIT, worked with the Atomic Energy Commission, with the World Bank for several years in 2 stints. Additional Secretary in External Affairs, JS Capital Markets in the Finance Ministry, and High Commissioner to the UK, and of course authored several books. All of you are authors. Navtej, thank you. You, of course, have won the Sahitya Academy Award, so congratulations. That's a great, great achievement, apart from the other great books that you've written, both fiction and non-fiction. I'm especially sort of taken up by the fact that you have written a book of Nanak and Second Thoughts and Indians at Herod's Gate, and 2 translations of Zafarnama and Savage Harvest. Right. And you, of course, are a columnist, of course, and a degree in commerce, got into service in 1980, US Ambassador 16 to 18, Israel Ambassador 2008 to 12. In the meantime, a short UK stint in 2016 as our High Commissioner, official spokesperson of the External Affairs Ministry 2002 to 2008. You've had postings at Moscow, Tehran, Warsaw, Geneva, Washington. So you've got enormous experience in this area. And so thank you very much. So Shyam, when I ask you, what do you mean by this strategic autonomy?
Strategic autonomy to me means the ability of a country to take relatively autonomous decisions on matters which are of vital interest to it. And I think this goes back to our own history. That is, when we emerged as an independent country, I think there was not only a political, but I think a popular consensus that never again the destiny of India or decisions regarding India should be taken in some other foreign capital. So we should be, in a sense, masters of our own house, recognizing that we are situated in a multi-country landscape, and therefore we cannot define our interests in any absolute manner.
Right. So
we have to, in fact, somehow reconcile, somehow accommodate the pursuit of vital interests by other countries. So that's the...
That conceptually what you're saying is right.
Conceptually, this is what
it means, yes.
And if you see non-alignment, or you talk about multi-alignment, or we talk about, how we are giving up the hesitations of the past, and we have now a much more confident future. This running theme has not changed.
Okay.
So
has anything changed?
Beg your pardon?
Has anything changed?
Has
anything
changed?
Yes,
of course it has to change, because one, India itself is transformed. The world has transformed, as you mentioned. And therefore, when you start defining your interests in terms of strategic autonomy, obviously things which you were doing before cannot be the same today. So there is a certain evolution that has taken place in how we define strategic autonomy. Now, whether or not the foreign policy today reflects
but that's what I'm asking. That's the reason for my question.
That is it has been debatable in the past. I remember the tremendous controversy about Mrs. Gandhi signing the friendship treaty with Russia. This is not this is not
True,
alignment.
true.
So there have been controversies in the past. So one should not make the mistake of thinking that this is something, new that has happened. Whenever we have faced very difficult situations, sometimes we have had to make adjustments. So this is not something that is a fixed concept. I think today, perhaps the pursuit of that strategic autonomy has become far more challenging because, the landscape around us has so dramatically changed, not only for us, but as you see for many other countries. So we have to, if we are making an assessment, we have to take into account what is our response to something as elementally changed around us as we are seeing today. Would it have been better to take, say, a more public stand condemning Russia when it invaded Ukraine? Would it have been better for us to stand our ground much more openly when Mr. Trump started putting pressure on us? Should we be more aligned as we seem to be with, say, Israel, with the UAE? Has this been something dictated by the kind of challenges that we are facing? And this is partly our response to that. Those are debatable. But I would say that, the kind of image that we have built up of being a much stronger nation, much more independent nation than in the past, that seems to be under some degree of threat. I mean, the credibility aspect is perhaps something that we have to really reflect. Because to me, as a professional diplomat, I don't know about my other two colleagues, but my experience in diplomacy has been that the most important asset that you have as a country is your credibility.
That you think is slightly damaged.
Credibility in terms of how you deal with adversaries, but credibility also how you deal with friends. So credibility, if it gets eroded, then the ability to pursue strategic autonomy, to me, then becomes compromised.
Okay, now I know why you are the quintessential diplomat. And that kudos to you on that. So anyway, be that as it may, the problem is that in the past, and you've given examples about our statements when Russia invaded Afghanistan, right? Recently, the conflict that's taken place. We've not condemned Russia. But we haven't stood up. It's like this, that when Trump says, don't buy oil from Russia, right? Otherwise, I'll impose tariffs. We don't even have the guts to make a public statement. If the US says, okay, now I give you 1 month's liberty to buy oil, we don't say a thing. We condemn Iran for having bombed some of the places in the Middle East, UAE, others. We don't condemn Israel for doing what it's doing. We have long-term relations with the Palestinians. That's our old policy. We don't talk about the two-state solution. We don't talk about it. The kind of things that are happening in Lebanon, or the children, we don't talk about that. None of that. Somewhere, and I agree with you, that our credibility in the diplomatic world is somewhat tarnished. And therefore, our space for strategic autonomy has been narrowed down. So I want Jaimini, do you agree with me on that?
Oh, definitely, our space has narrowed down in many ways, not just diplomatically, but also economically. But I want to mention what the Latin Americans say, only half in jest, about their foreign policy. They say, muy lejos de Dios, that means very far, we are very far from God, y muy cerca de Estados Unidos, and unfortunately too close to the US. So we can make up our mind, how does that apply to us? We are perhaps I don't know whether we are close or far from God, because that I don't want to get into any controversy.
Nowadays we are very close to God.
We want to be careful about that. But we are very close to China and Pakistan. And we are also very dependent on what is going on in West Asia. And I want to bring in not just the diplomatic part of it, but also the economic side of it. And we haven't really, all that was said a minute back about how we have not stood up for basic human rights of people in Gaza, I completely agree with. So I won't repeat myself. But you have a situation where some 30% of the oil that the world consumes comes out of West Asia.
Almost, yes.
And that's not going to change. That's about 85 or 90% of that production is impaired to greater or less extent. So where are we in terms of our diplomacy there? And you referred twice, I think, to buying oil from Russia. So I think it should be part of our diplomatic endeavor to convince the US that we can't not buy oil from Russia, unless, of course, the price that Russia offers it at is way higher than what we can get
The US says you buy oil from us, we've got plenty of it.
As long as the cost, including the landed cost, that means plus cost of transportation and the nature of the oil, because there are all kinds of oils. Some are heavier, some are lighter. What we require for the byproducts that come out of refining, I don't really know. I'm not technically qualified to talk about that. But we buy from wherever it is economically sound for us to buy. I'm including cost of transportation and the quality of the oil. But coming back to your question again, in terms of what I said about being close to Pakistan and China, you've already referred to the various issues that we have with China. But we have a formation called BRICS. There's going to be a summit, the BRICS summit in September. Only half in jest, some commentators are saying, well, Brazil is again too close to the United States. It has certain limitations in terms of its degrees of freedom.
They've spoken up against the US. Brazil has.
On Gaza, they have spoken up more than us.
Yes.
But RICS, you know what the acronym RICS will signify? Russia, Iran, China, and South Africa.
Right.
I mean, this is the level of popular, should I say, not expert opinion, but popular opinion as how the world has moved and how India has shortchanged itself through its foreign policy to be actually replaced by Iran in BRICS in terms of the popular thought, not because of the substance. India is one of the founders of the BRICS movement. So, it comes as a surprise, and I must submit as a painful surprise to even see jokes like this cracked at our expense. So I would think that at this stage it's high time. I don't know whether you observed what happened in Singapore over the last 3 days, 29th, 30th, 31st. We had the IISS. They call it summit. It's not a summit, it's a think tank in London. So, but the Chinese sent only the Deputy Defense Minister, second year running. Of course, Mr. Pete Hegseth, not the Secretary of Defense, mind you, Secretary of War. So he was there. And it is useful to see how they see themselves in this area. They're talking about underwater drones to contain China. At the same time, Mr. Hegseth doesn't say a word about Taiwan. So they will accommodate China wherever it is convenient for them. So we should be careful and watch these developments in terms of our own security in the Indo-Pacific area. So it would be very instructive to go through the press conferences. The Japanese defense minister, whose father, I'm sure Mr. Shyam Saran will know much, much more about it because he served there, was prime minister somewhere in the first decade of this century. He said, we are going to increase our defense expenditure to 2.5.
Yes.
Hegseth, of course, is talking about how, and they had the AUKUS meeting of the Australian defense minister, the UK defense minister, and of course, Pete Hegseth, and they talked about these underwater drones, so to speak, and they will be laying cables and they'll be observing and, if necessary, used for conflicts. I don't see much of that conversation finding an echo here in our strategic circles. Again, I would hasten to submit, I might have missed it, but we need to watch some of these developments also, in addition to what my senior, Mr. Shyam Saran, or rather Ambassador Shyam Saran just said.
Navtej?
What's the question?
That's the question. Do you agree? Do you agree with
Well,
my
there's
analysis?
so much has been said, and
yeah.
I think this is all perfectly in order. But I can come at it from a slightly different angle. I think, as Ambassador Shyam Saran said, strategic autonomy is not something new. Some people say we called it non-alignment, we tweaked it to a different world. That's fine. Now, what has happened is that when things were stable, say about, I would say even 5 years ago, when things were stable, and even Trump's first term, we can consider it as stable, our strategic autonomy more or less worked because we were going with the US without much criticism. In fact, we were congratulating ourselves that we have developed this relationship for 20 years. No matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in power in India, it's had an upward graph right from our nuclear test days. That's where my personal cutoff is. And we progressed through the nuclear deal and various other things, and then reached the major defense partner. We signed the foundational agreements, and it was not seen as a negative.
Yes.
Neither in India nor anywhere else. And it was a sort of big feather, so to speak, in our cap.
We were getting closer to Israel also.
And we were progressively getting closer to Israel right from 92, formally.
Yes.
And having been there myself, I can say that those 4 years, we managed to develop our relationship, and before me and after me, with Israel, with more or less keeping our old position on Palestine.
Right.
And the Israelis had actually, as the Americans say, had baked that in. I used to periodically get hauled up to the Foreign Office and fired up, and then they'd joke about it. I'd say, we have a good relationship, but this we can't give up. And we had a much stronger position in the multilateral forum on Palestine, for instance. At the same time, what happened during that process is we neglected our Russia relationship. On China, we thought that being part of the US broad sort of partnership would help us bolster, at least in the maritime area, against China.
Right.
Somewhere we also lost out on our relationship in Iran.
Right.
Our Chabahar didn't really take off, and various things, and sort of that went off the radar. Now, as I said, while things were stable, this looked fine. Today, when the whole chessboard has been thrown up, and personal attacks by Trump, actually kind of vengeful attacks on India, have brought this into sharp focus, that why did you do this? And I'm afraid it's going to take time to begin to stand up to Trump. Because I think we could have chosen the other way around. I mean, people in power would know why and when, but we have chosen the path of transactional foreign policy as against a value-loaded foreign policy, which used to be in some ways our strength. Now, very often that value-loaded foreign policy is begun to be seen as a weakness. So you say, I'm transactional, I'll get what I can from you, I'll get what I can from you, etc. And when you begin to think only of your problems, then you begin to narrow your space. So somewhere we had to perhaps be more vocal, not only on human rights, but also on other issues which concern the global South. But then we've been caught somewhere between trying to be part of the global South, trying to be a bridge from the global South to the North, and trying to also get to the big table.
No, but we're a big country in this negotiation. We should have been part of the negotiating strategy to end the war, because we are not in that position, because we can't be. We have aligned ourselves so much with Israel and the United States.
Again, it's a question of, one is that, but again, it's a question of how you perceive your vital interests, as was mentioned earlier, and then how do you begin to pursue them. Our vital interests in the Gulf and in West Asia are well known. We have energy, we have remittances, we have 9 million people, and all the rest of it, and a great hope of investment from the Gulf, from UAE, Qatar, etc., besides the energy, LNG and all that. But these were our major sources. A deep relationship has been developed. Now, whether that interest will be served better by blanking out on Iran and going fully with Israel, or whether that interest will be served better by, again, stepping up your, sort of normative statements, etc., and be able to play a role. So I think that is a choice which obviously was made. We decided to keep quiet and pursue those interests. And that sometimes looks like you've completely sided with one. And
that's the public perception, I can say.
That's the public perception, and I think the real test will be once the dust settles on this. Once the dust settles on it, how do we pursue then our relationship with Iran? How do we then tweak our relationship with Israel? We should learn our lessons from how Israel is being perceived by the rest of the world. So how do we tweak that? I think we need to tweak that. I know Israel is a very important partner, but so is Iran.
So is Iran.
I mean, there are several layers of your engagement with West Asia. It's not just defense, it's not just
our
money.
UAE relationship with the UAE, for example.
So UAE is very important.
Very important for us.
So you have the economic aspects, you have the security aspects, and you have the pure geography. You have the whole geography. You cannot afford to ignore Iran.
Okay, let me, Shyam Saran, ask you a different question now. And that is that this conflict has hurt South Asian countries or South Asia much more than any other part of the world. In other words, our friends have hurt us more than they've hurt anybody else. Right? Energy, in terms of our oil, in terms of gas, LPG. Now,
Fertilizers too.
Fertilizers, agriculture, no, medicine. Right? Pharma, big time. Now, if our friends are hurting us the most, at least we should be able to convey to our friends, look, this war is hurting us the most. Your policies are hurting your real friends, and we are your partners. At least that we should have sent people saying that, look, why are you doing this? At least some public statement. Am I right or am I wrong?
More than public statement, I think you have to acknowledge the fact that what your friends, so-called friends, have done has really pushed you to the margins.
Exactly.
Pushed you to the margins of a region, as Navtej said, is very vital to our interests. So when I was talking about vital interests, here is something where you really have vital interests. Energy, but more than that, the safety and security of your own people.
Yes,
and of course, without any doubt, this is our Western security flank.
Yes,
so we cannot in any way get away from the fact that what has happened has really pushed us to the margin. Now, my view is that this was due to a miscalculation.
Okay.
Because I think there was perhaps a sense that, if the attack takes place against Iran, this will be over.
There'll be change of regime.
Yes, there could be, and in some sense, we would have therefore positioned ourselves in a better kind of place in the aftermath. That did not happen. Now, when that did not happen, then even in transactional terms, you should have started trimming your sails, because of the very major interests involved. I think in that respect, we have been, maybe because it has been somewhat confusing, the situation that has emerged, and therefore the kind of agility that there should have been in dealing with it has not been there. I think, for example, the failure to even get a condolence message.
Yes.
When the supreme leader was killed, I think that played very badly. Played very badly not only with the Iranians, but it played badly all around. because that's not something that India does.
That's true.
You know, so I think there is one is a reputational damage, and the reputational damage, even if it is intangible, I believe it is still important. You know, and the second is the real, undermining of your interest and finding yourself at the margin where you do not seem to be able to play a kind of role to deal with this. This is not a happy situation to be. So I would say that, yes, one can accept that, look, we have been faced with a situation which virtually every country is groping,
Yes, absolutely.
and doesn't know. So why do you think that we should be an exception? Maybe up to a certain point that is true. But this is where what Navtej mentioned about transactionalism. I have written about
Yes, of course.
the limits of transactionalism.
I read your piece the other day.
And
yes.
so even in terms of a pragmatic foreign policy, I think it is beginning to appear that this business of, look, we have to look after our interests. Others are looking after their interests. We should be very, sort of bloody-minded about this. This is our interest. We will fight for those interests. I think we are beginning to realize that that does not necessarily become a effective for
Pay
policy.
dividends, yes. Of course.
So some degree of rethink, I think, is really important, because the situation is not going to stabilize.
That's right.
For quite some time to come. So we are going to be facing a much more fluid situation around us, much longer than perhaps we realize. And therefore, how do we locate ourselves in this kind of a situation? This is very, very, important. And I'm not very sure that we are actually heading in that direction.
Jaimini, you're an economist also, so I want to turn this into, your thoughts on the economic side of it, because we are dependent on the United States of America big time on our exports, right? And because of that dependency, the only country we have a big surplus with is with the United States. They imposed 50% tariffs. Now, of course, it's 18%. Now, if our textile sector, our gem sector, our IT sector, pharma sector are all dependent on exports to the United States, we have no choice from an economic standpoint, because we have a deficit with China, a deficit with Russia, except to toe the line of the United States, because our economy, we have not taken really care of our economy for a long period of time, right? And our GDP is even less than the GDP per capita is less than the per capita of Bangladesh. That's what we've come to, in between Bangladesh and Myanmar. That's our situation today, which is very sad. Maybe that's what's affecting our foreign policy and our choices.
Definitely, it's a constraint, but it's also a question of how you go about it. I just read a report from the Reserve Bank of India, which says that they are anticipating that borrowers will not be able to pay back in the way the contracts have been laid out. I'm talking about a very recent report. RBI is already sounding a note of caution. I mean,
Yes.
I'm adding to what you said in terms of our dependencies, but that is, of course, related to the conflict. Because this is an additional burden on us, what is going on in terms of the rise in prices of fossil fuels and shortages which will come to hit us over the next 2 years. But the rest of it, I don't think, because just as we are dependent on selling services more than goods to the US, they are also dependent to that extent, their private sector. It's part of foreign policy to be able to convince their private sector, which wields enormous clout, as we know, particularly with this administration. I don't know whether we have done enough of that, because it is not just to go and meet people in State Department. You also need to meet people across the board as far as the top CEOs are concerned. And I don't think our situation is as vulnerable as it is made out to be, that we cannot speak up in terms of what
You say despite this, we can still have enough
we can
space
speak up. I mean, this is because it's a mutual dependency. They don't buy from us because they love us. They buy
no doubt about
generics. They buy generics from us because they're cheapest. He didn't impose any
But
tariffs on...
we get generics from China now. As you
No,
know.
no, no. We get the APIs.
API, yes.
The
API from China.
imports, which we used to make
Yes.
in the first...
Yeah, now we get it from China.
First 5 years of this century, we were self-sufficient in
Yes,
APIs.
yes.
But because some of these things we can do domestically, why are we not making APIs? And on their side, there is a huge lobby which will say, no, we need the Indian generics. And we motivate, we get their support, etc. And Trump is not there forever. I don't know whether he will be the kind of president he is after the November congressional elections. I'm not saying that we should put our eggs in that basket and hope that...
We shouldn't say, "Ab ki baar bhi Trump sarkar."
That, of course, is now history. But you asked me on the economic side, I think we, as a large exporter, also of certain goods and services to the US, also have a certain amount of political clout, if not clout, at least say in that system. And we haven't used it enough. And here I'm going to say something very controversial, I think, because a lot of my colleagues have their children in the US. We have another kind of dependency on the US. Because you might have noticed that he's made all
controversial is the truth, no? Truth is never controversial.
Okay, if you say so. Satyameva Jayate is our national slogan.
Right.
So
you have the national education policy, but it only works for Indians, not the ministers and not people in power, right?
No, the thing is that we don't like to talk about it, but there is a certain group of people who are in high positions or were in high positions whose close relatives are settled in English-speaking countries and quite often in the US.
They don't know Sanskrit, do they?
For all I know, they also know Sanskrit, and their children do very well in the spelling contest. They spell bees. They always a person of Indian origin who wins it. Usually a second or a third generation person. No, what I'm saying is that, we need to be frank about these things and say frankness is also necessary in diplomacy beyond a point. You cannot constantly be, massaging everything. The rest of the world can see it.
Especially when Trump says you're a dead economy, you're obnoxious, right?
The way he uses, the kind of language he uses, we don't need to go into that kind of stuff, but we can be a little more frank.
Okay.
And to that extent, we have options. And we, as you pointed out, Russia, why did we get into this thing, we will not buy oil from Russia? What is this? I mean, you say, on the one hand, you talk about market economy. Why can't we tell them, we will buy oil
I wish we had the guts to do that. I can say. But anyway, be that as it may. I mean, very interesting topic that came to my mind. The other day I saw something on television about people in the textile sector. I just want to share this with you. Very interesting. People in the textile sector, women with machines on their hands, and the way their hands are moving. They are recording them on a computer so that they don't need the hands anymore. Right? So all textile garments will be made without human beings. That's the AI that is going to come. It's going to take over the world economy. That will be the worst thing to happen to India. And when these kind of things happen, our foreign policy will have no real space. I think this is the greatest tragedy of India, that we have not built our economy. And if we don't build our economy, we will not have the space to have an independent voice, even in foreign policy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't understand artificial intelligence in
I'll give you an example.
any technological detail, but I think the basic fact is that if it takes over the labor level and the less thinking but more manual jobs, then obviously a country like India is going to suffer.
Yeah.
But I think what has happened is, and then again, I'm not fully au fait with all the details, but I think the fact is that AI, we did a huge summit this year.
Yes.
Now, so in a way, there is a lot of interest to get into AI.
Yes.
And you find it now even on the recent tour of Europe that the Prime Minister did. I think AI, I was looking at the various things in the various European countries, particularly with Netherlands.
Yes, yes.
We've done a deal which will, we are somewhere low on the AI value chain. So basic things like testing, packing,
service,
etc.
service sector.
Services.
Yeah.
So and Netherlands is very big,
That's right.
particularly in the packaging of chips and the manufacture of machines. So somewhere we are trying to get into it, and for whatever it's worth, because we'll run out
That's
of
true.
time.
It's like in the IT sector, Navtej.
Yeah.
In the IT sector, we're just a service industry.
Yeah.
The property belongs to someone else, and we serve them.
But we are far away from the
Same thing.
manufacturing
Yeah, exactly.
aspects and the higher end
Yes,
of AI. And frankly, I think that's going to be a huge
The reason
challenge.
why I asked this question is there's a reason behind it. That there's a direct relationship with foreign autonomy and foreign policy, strategic autonomy, and the strength of the economy of a nation. Right?
Well, that's why we keep hearing about critical minerals, rare earths.
No, but the Secretary of State has come here recently, has a deal with us on rare minerals, and we're going to,
But that's,
deal with them together.
if you notice, that's been the huge leverage of China on
correct.
US.
Absolutely.
So that's why Trump
That's
has had to back down.
That's right. That's right.
Because the huge processing of critical minerals, only China can
That's
do.
why Marco Rubio came here, only because of that reason, and other things also. This is the theme is your foreign policy can never be strategically autonomous unless you have the economic strength to bargain.
Fair point.
Sure. I mean, no two ways about it. But
And we don't have
I
that.
would say that today, I think you are beginning to realize that all these, efforts at self-reliance,
Yes.
Atmanirbharta, frankly speaking, all the strategic areas that we are talking about, these you can only pursue as a partnership.
Yes.
That is the ability of India to really carve out a completely independent, kind of sphere for itself in these new technologies, simply not possible. So I think we have to acknowledge that, and acknowledging that, therefore, your foreign policy has to be directed towards forming those kind of partnerships which will allow you to at
Exactly.
least stay in the game, if not become the leading
Exactly.
country. Now, this is where, again, transactionalism doesn't work.
It doesn't work, yes.
Because these are longer term relationships that you have to establish. And in those longer term relationships, the notion that, tomorrow I can,
Shift.
sort of flip this way and that way doesn't work. So I think if you can begin to move in that direction, order your relationships with other countries, keeping this purpose in mind, I think you'll be doing much better. Also, don't forget that you may be low down in that ranking, but with respect to a large number of other countries, developing countries,
Yes.
you are actually quite high up in that ladder.
Correct.
Therefore, your ability to give what you may call public goods to that large constituency is actually quite high.
But real influence comes when you're able to sell BrahMos to others, which we are
Sure,
doing now.
sure.
That's the way we need to go. We should
Yes.
have that leverage.
But
We
look
need
at
Russia's permission for every sale.
even in
Yeah.
terms of your digital economy,
Yes.
you have areas where you have shown your strength.
That's right.
In many ways, your payment systems are more advanced than what you can even see today in the United States of America.
That's true. That's true.
So I think there are niche areas where actually you can be a very important country for a large number of developing countries. Why not make a start with your own neighbors?
Yes.
I keep coming back to that same theme again and
You said
again,
it
that
before.
unless you get your neighborhood right,
Right.
any notion of playing a larger regional role or global
So you are a
role
believer in
simply
neighborhood first.
will not work.
Yes.
But you can actually be a provider of those public goods to begin with to your neighbors.
True.
If you become an engine of growth for them, look at the kind of diplomatic space that it opens up for you. So that is why I said some rethink in terms of how we deal with this new world which is emerging. That has become very, very important.
Okay, let me ask a different question and then I'll end up with Shyam on that question. Is there any space for moral positions in diplomacy?
None whatsoever.
None.
You do what is right, but you can't take a moral stand.
Moral sometimes is associated with being right. I hope, at least.
You don't side with Hitler, for instance.
No, that's not a moral position.
That is a
That's not a
moral
moral
position
position.
because
I'm sorry.
at some point of time...
When I say moral, I mean the norm. Means that if children are getting killed.
Fair enough.
That's what I mean.
No, that is
position.
different. That we need to take a position.
Even though your relationship is transactional, there must be some moral fiber.
There are bounds within which, like South Africa has gone and got Netanyahu indicted by, I think, the
in the criminal
in the ICC.
ICC, yes.
Not ICJ, ICC, and he can't go to Europe because he might get arrested if they honor that particular judgment.
That is true.
So I salute South Africa for that. And South Africa is saluted by a number of other countries, not just by Indians like me. So that point of yours, I accept. But within that, there is a lot of
No, I
leeway.
agree with you. I'm just saying that on the kind of thing that Jaimini was killed, you see, if you tell Raul Castro, 2 Americans were killed on a flight and we'll prosecute for murder, nobody says anything when people in the IRG are killed and the Khomeini is killed. Nobody says a thing. So there is a moral, hiatus there.
No,
it is unfortunate that big powers behave like this and they're not answerable to anybody. You say they cannot even use nuclear technology for civilian purposes. And Israel is not part of the NPT, and yet they have a nuclear power.
You're absolutely right.
So you don't say a thing about that. So I think there is a moral
you're absolutely
element.
right. Absolutely
What do you
right.
say, Navtej?
No, I see in international relations, the moral code is laid down.
Yeah.
It's laid down in the UN Charter. It's laid down in the Geneva Conventions. We should uphold those. And that is where our strength has always been.
Yes.
We were, leading UN processes when we didn't have great economic power.
That's right.
So I think that we should not cherry off, call it moral or call it legal or call it international law. But I think those we must take the lead in upholding. Because therein lies the interests of a large number of countries.
That's right.
You see, they are the members of the GA. They need people like India to stand up and defend them. And it's not just on human rights or not just on genocide, etc. What about climate justice?
Yes.
You look at the small island states. They are desperate for somebody to take up their causes of rising sea levels. So there are a number of areas where there is a vacuum. None of the big powers are there or taking.
Yeah.
Even China, does it when in a more transactional way or when they want to do it. But that is, I think, where there is a vacuum and we should take that space back again.
Which we have lost, according to me. What do you say, Shyam?
Oh, yes. I mean, that is a space you have lost. Yes. As Navtej mentioned, that even when we were much weaker, don't forget that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was an Indian contribution.
Yes.
Opposed by both the US as well as the then Soviet Union. So there was tremendous activism in the UN system because we understood that establishing that kind of moral code, even if there are powerful countries who will violate those every now and then, that has a certain restraining power. And I think it still is something which is very important. So it takes me back to the point that I was making, that even if you are not in the big league, but you are in the middle league. You have capabilities and you have that kind of diplomatic experience of the past, which you can really put at the service of a very large number of countries who actually, there was a time when they looked to India to take the cue.
Yes.
In taking positions at the UN on many issues, they would say, okay, what are the Indians doing? And they felt very safe in adopting the same position.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So, we do not perhaps realize how large a reputational asset that was.
I agree. I agree.
So, if we can somehow, start coming back to that kind of position, I think it will be to our advantage. This whole business of, seat at the high table and, being amongst the big guys, I think that has been premature.
I agree. So actually, to sum up, I say that our at least my sense is that our foreign policy may be rudderless, but it's not udderless.
Sorry, what was that?
That's the
Maybe
point.
rudderless, but not udderless.
That's the poet in you coming.
We have a lot to offer. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.